You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. Hello, welcome to Garibaldi Red, the first of our World Cup specials, and I'm delighted to be joined by a Nottingham Forest legend in the form of a European Cup winner and a former manager in Martin O'Neill. Martin, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Matt. How are you?
Yes, good. Doing media rounds, promoting your book. You must be pretty tired of talking about it, or are you still enjoying it?
I think that if it's for a short period of time, which I think it is, it's actually been a bit of fun. I must admit, I've been over in Ireland and towards last weekend, and obviously up in Nottingham on Saturday. So, but absolutely fine. Thank you.
Yes, you mentioned you'll be in Nottingham, a book signing. I should say, we'll give it a good plug before we start. Waterston's Bridlesmith Gate on Saturday between 2 and 3. So do get down and see Martin. Tell us about the book and why now.
I actually penned it myself rather than having it ghostwritten because I really wanted to do it myself. It would be my voice, I suppose, as it's being read. I think that I stuck it down in longhand as well to throw back to my days of quite some years ago at school. So, and I accept the fact that there are easier ways to do it, I must admit. So my daughters kept telling me, but writing in longhand and then photocopying it, sending it to my daughters who would put it onto a machine to at least speak into. I think that, we got there in the end eventually, so, but it was genuinely fun doing it. I think that probably started about 6 months ago, really. And I'd written just a couple of little pages myself, particularly days that I remember distinctly, first day ever at Nottingham Forest, way back in October 1971. And then Brian Clough's first day arriving as well too. So those 2 days are so clear in my memory now at this minute that the last things I think will ever fade from me. So I think I really kind of started from there and just kept going.
Does it come easy to you as someone who writes a lot for a living? The first words are the hardest ones I found, and then it flows from
absolutely. There. Yeah, definitely. I think that just putting down what I thought were vivid recollections. They were my recollections anyway. It might be interesting to see whether, for instance, John Robertson, who was in the dressing room at the same time as me that particular day, way back when Brian Clough first arrived in January 1975, his recollection of it might be slightly different. But in essence, really what happened there was I think, pretty true to form.
Before we talk about you coming to Forest then, just you growing up in Northern Ireland, my history is not amazing, but I think the troubles are starting around the time you come to Nottingham. Bloody Sunday's not far away on the horizon. Were you keen to get out of Northern Ireland to pursue a life in football, or were you happy with your studies as you were trained to be a solicitor, I think? Yeah,
I was at the Queen's University in Belfast at the time, playing amateur football for Distillery Football Club. They were an Irish League team. So we were getting a little bit of prominence. We had won the Irish Cup, and as a result, we were playing in this season's European Cup Winners' Cup, as it was called at that time, and we were drawn against Barcelona. So and in the first game at Windsor Park, I actually scored a goal against Barcelona. So I'm getting a little bit of there's a bit of traction around me at the time, and then this opportunity to play for Northern Ireland. In the last 20 minutes, I got chosen in a game. In fact, it was the last match in Northern Ireland for quite some considerable years for the national side. And so this would have been in October of 1971. I get on for the last 20 minutes. Matt Gillies, who's over watching Liam O'Kane play, because Liam is one of his players at Nottingham Forest, saw the game, puts in a bid for me, and there I am. I arrive at Nottingham in 1971, just determined, as you mentioned. Just the troubles were really, they were not just brewing, but they were rife at that time in Northern Ireland. So I suppose perhaps maybe an opportunity to start a footballing career, which is something I really wanted to do from an early age.
Had there been much interest in you, from other English clubs, or had you kind of broken through so quickly that Forest stole a march then?
The coach of the Northern Ireland team, and he was a player manager called Terry NEILL, who ended up managing both Tottenham Hotspur and Arsenal for long periods. He was player manager of Hull City. and he was the one that put me on for the 20 minutes in the game. There had a couple of players didn't turn up from England in the game, and rather than getting a replacement from let's say from Birmingham or somewhere like that, then he put me into the squad. I get the last 20 minutes. He, in actual fact, made a bid of £10,000 for me to Hull, and about 3 days later, it was up to 15,000 by Nottingham Forest. So I think I owe a lot to him, because he was the one that really got the ball rolling as much as anything else. But obviously, Forest being in the big league, the top league, it was called the First Division at the time, but it was the Premier League as it is now, then that's where I really wanted to be.
What kind of football club do you join then in Forest? Because, the years of Brian Clough and big success are a few years away at this point. What was it like when you first walked through the door?
All right. The club was in turmoil at the time. It was difficult. They had remember, we're talking a couple of years after their fantastic effort when they got to the semi-final of the FA Cup in 1967, runners up in the league as well too. So and they had a very fine side, but some of the players perhaps were getting, just a little bit older. Perhaps I'm not exactly sure what had happened to them, but they still possessed a great footballer in Ian Storey-Moore. It was fantastic that he left to go to Manchester United a couple of months later, and so it was a real struggle for the team throughout the year. It really didn't bother me too much, Matt, because I'm there. I'm young now, and I'm going to change the world, aren't I? I'm ready, and I scored in my debut against West Bromwich Albion. Followed it up a couple of weeks later by a goal at Old Trafford against George Best, Bobby Charlton, and Dennis Law. And I think, well, this is a really easy game now. I'm superstar now, absolutely. But life just doesn't work out like that. I think there were a few difficulties ahead.
You mentioned Ian Storey-Moore. I'm meandering ahead a little bit, but I mean, he's been on here. He's a lovely man, and I guess he becomes a big ally of yours. He's chief scout for you at a few clubs, isn't he? Tell us a bit about your relationship with him.
He, naturally a great footballer at the time. He's head and shoulders the best player at the football club. He had been brilliant in the previous couple of years as well, from about 1968 to right through. You almost got the impression that he was keeping Forest in the big league single-handedly, scoring goals from outside left, just a really, really, really top quality player. And in March of 1972, Brian Clough tried to take him to Derby County. And in fact, Ian was paraded around the baseball ground at the time in 72, much to the real annoyance of the Nottingham Forest committee, who hadn't given it permission. But Brian, in his own inimitable way, was trying to push things through, and felt that if he could parade Ian Storey-Moore around the ground, then surely the Nottingham Forest committee would be too embarrassed to say, the move has not taken place. But no, they stood their ground, and Ian eventually went to Manchester United. Unfortunately, he picked up an injury within a year or 18 months, and really stopped what would have been a glittering career to play alongside Best, Charlton and Law. But a really fine, you mentioned, really lovely man, genuinely lovely man. I've for someone who was so good, really so good. He is so self-effacing about his career. It's untrue. But then I got to, obviously I kept in touch with him during the years. He came back to the Nottinghamshire area to live again after his career had finished. And he did some management himself. But when I had the opportunity, particularly at Aston Villa, for him to come in and do the scouting, which he was a very, very good judge of a player, that's when we came back together again.
So you mentioned Brian Clough there, and obviously you can't do an interview in your life without mentioning Brian Clough, I'm sure. When he arrived, did you feel like the group of players was crying out for someone like him, or was it a bolt from the blue and he just shook up the whole world around you?
A bit of both, I think. He came in that day, and first of all, it would be a genuine honour for a second division club like ourselves at the time to have a manager of that calibre thinking about managing us. Do you remember he'd won the league at Derby in 1972? I know that Brian resigned almost every single week, and finally the chairman decided, well, okay, if that's what you're doing, you're going to have to resign. Brian didn't like it at all, then left to go to Brighton. He and Peter Taylor went down to Brighton. Then Brian had the chance to go back into the big league with Leeds United. That was never going to work because he had been too critical of those players. Those players were brilliant footballers, but he had been too critical, saying that they had cheated and they didn't deserve their medals and they should throw them in the bin. So that sort of an approach might not get you too far if you are current league champions. So it didn't happen for him. 44 days. And then now suddenly in January of 1975, he was coming to Nottingham Forest, 15, 16, 17 miles down the road from us into the second division. Well, and we would have been a group of nondescripts at that stage, So I think just him, what shall I say, blazing into the place, perhaps, you knew that life was going to change. Let me put it this way. And while the results didn't exactly follow immediately, or for a period of time. In fact, I think after the first 2 victories, we didn't win a game for about 15 or 16 matches. You just felt that when Peter Taylor, his sidekick, arrived with him, life was going to really going to change.
What was your relationship like with Clough? It sounds like it was occasionally fairly fractious. Was it always that way, or did it evolve over the years?
As John Robertson says to me, if you look at the records, Martin, we went the year we won the league with 42 games, and you actually played in 38 of them, so fairly decent. And the year that we went, between seasons, we went in 42, ironically, also 42 league game unbeaten run, only to be bettered by Arsenal, a few years ago. And I also played in 38 of those. So I shouldn't really complain too much, but it seemed as if I was trying to, from a distance, or maybe at the time, I felt as if that always looking for his approval, I must admit, but weren't we all? And didn't seem as forthcoming in my direction as often as it was in maybe in John Robertson's or Tony Woodcock's. But then again, they might turn around and say, well, listen, John was superstar, so, take your time.
Was that him managing you? Do you think he thought that's what you needed to perform? You needed a point to prove, do you think?
Do you know what? I absolutely, in hindsight, I think that's exactly right. I think that's what he felt about me. And I think, in all honesty, I think a little bit of praise here and there wouldn't have gone amiss. But yeah, I think that was his case, as much as anything else. Plus the fact that I'm not so sure that he was all that wildly fond of me either. So maybe, and third point, maybe I didn't deserve all these little points of praise that he was used to giving to other players.
It might be a difficult one to answer, but why do you think he wasn't fond of you?
I said I spoke too much in the dressing room, and I shouldn't have. I really should have just kept quiet. As my old pal John Robertson said, Martin, just sit down, leave it. But if I thought that there was a point to argue, and you know what, absolutely should have done. I should have taken John's advice. Just sit there, take the criticism, get on with it. But because you're never going to win. Generally, as a player, you're never really going to win as a manager, and absolutely no chance of winning an argument when Brian Clough was the manager.
Was that the budding solicitor in you then, going back to Queen's College? You were the argumentative nature. Was that always there?
I think you know what? Sometimes I think about it with great embarrassment as much as anything else, Matt. Yeah, listen, the man was absolutely phenomenal at his job. He was terrific. He was so charismatic at the time, and someone like that there is going to change your life, and that's exactly what he did with a group of us.
Where would you have been today, do you think, if Brian Clough hadn't come into Forest? It's difficult to answer, but would you?
It is really difficult to answer. I sometimes I am asked that question, and I really don't know about myself. Would John Robertson have been a really good player? Yes. Would Tony Woodcock have been a really good player? Yes. Viv Anderson, absolutely. Ian Boyer. I think that's right. Would we have had the success that we did have as a football club with Brian Clough hadn't been there? Absolutely not. We wouldn't have done that. So you would like to think at some. Funnily enough, I actually started to play really well under Dave Mackay in 1970-73. I was only very young, obviously, but I started to play really well, as did John Robertson, 73. And when Dave left to go to Derby County, it left a bit of a void. And a new manager called Alan Brown came in, didn't see eye to eye with myself, didn't see eye to eye with John Robertson, which gives me a great excuse, because if you don't see eye to eye with John Robertson, who's a wonder player, then you don't feel so bad. But But really, yeah, so Brian Clough arriving in Nottingham in 1975, early 75, was maybe a glimmer again for me to resurrect a career that seemed for a while to once on the boil, and then secondly well and truly off the boil. But hard to imagine what it'd be like without him now. When I think about it, had any other manager come in, I'm not so sure that we would have had it.
So how on earth do you go on to win the league then? Because like you say, it took a few years to get going under Brian. You didn't take the second division by storm when you got promoted, and then obviously you go on this incredible run. Was it players clicking, the new additions coming in? Was it Clough and Taylor hitting their stride back in the top flight? How do you explain it?
I think, remember, we scrambled up really. We finished third in the league that year. There was no such things as playoff positions, so it was Wolves and Chelsea, and us going up in a game where we weren't even involved in. Our season had ended against, I think it was against Millwall. I think we had won 1-0, and then a week later. The very week later, we are in a plane traveling to Mallorca or somewhere like that, and news come over the pilot made some announcement that Bolton were a goal behind against Wolves, and we didn't hear anything else then until we touched down. And of course, there's this frantic charge to get to a phone. No mobile phones in those days, and the chairman of the football club phoned home, and then as we were all gathering around waiting for the result, not knowing, we didn't know what the score would be, he said to Brian, I think congratulations are in order, and obviously the Wolves had won the game at Bolton. Now Bolton still needed to win their game against Bristol Rovers, I think it was, on the following Tuesday by about 14 or 15 goals. And even Brian Clough didn't celebrate until after that game was over, just to make sure. But in essence, we knew that we were going to make it. So suddenly then we're in the big league. Of course, pre-season we signed Kenny Burns, changed Kenny Burns from a centre forward at Birmingham to a centre half. And that was a big move. And then within 7 games, Peter Shilton and Archie Gemmell arrived. And then a couple of weeks after that then David Needham. So in essence, although we haven't, by today's standards, not the biggest squad in the world, I think those additions helped us enormously, really. And we just got on a run and didn't even think about defeat, believe it or not. Really did not think about that. Other than we took a fair old dousing at Arsenal one day. I think it was about our 4th or 5th game in, and Clough and Taylor weren't too happy about that. So that's weren't happy at all about us, how we just laid down as far as they were concerned. Well, I don't think we actually did that. It's hard to say that Larry Lloyd would ever lie down, but we got the feeling that they weren't very pleased, and they continued their tirade against us in not only in the dressing room at the old Arsenal stadium at Highbury, but continued it the following Monday as well too, when tempers were really frayed. But I think we learned a lot from that, and our run, I think that we lost 3 games that season in the league, and the last one being around about November time. So fantastic run, and Clough and Taylor, of course, obviously in their element at the time, as the results were going from strength to strength.
You mentioned Kenny there. Let me ask you about him, because I used to ghostwrite his column and Gary's column for the Post. I couldn't put Kenny on a video like this because I wouldn't have a clue what he was going to say even now. What was Kenny like in the dressing room as a player?
Oh, Burns was well, as you know, that he was very strong. First of all, he was abrasive, and when I know, and he had a couple of false teeth, as you know. And when he took those teeth out, I have to say, Matt, he was a scary character. That was just in the dressing room. So you can imagine what opposition centre forwards might have felt like when they're up against him. Burns was a good player, good, very, very strong. And he and Larry Lloyd in particular had a really been, obviously a great combination. And Lloyd could play a bit. Kenny used to sweep the ball out to the left-hand side all the time. And when I complained that it was going out to the left. Brian Clough said, and so it should be, son. He's a genius, meaning John Robertson is a genius. And so from all of those things, but Burns was a strong player. He won the Player of the Year that year, but I think he got that because he was, what shall I say, a renewed character. You know, he had a bit of a reputation, I think, in Birmingham for always fighting, occasionally getting sent off, and maybe smashing, if he was playing centre forward, smashing the big centre half beside him. And then suddenly, you know, Clough and Taylor tamed him, and he became an obvious stalwart of the side.
I suppose one of the great moments of that season is when you win the league and Shilton pulls off that save from, you know, Ferguson. I mean, that was 4 years before I was born, and you feel like I was there in a sense because you see it that many times. Was that the best save that you've seen, you know, on a pitch yourself?
Yeah, it was a fantastic save, but a really great save. And of course, because of the day, because that was enabled us to win the title that day. But Matthew, if we hadn't have won the league then, that day, we'd have won it the following week. And if we hadn't have won it the following week, we'd have won it the week after that. But because we happened to win it that particular week, and the save was magnificent, then it goes into folklore. But again, the nil-nil draw was enough for us to get that point that we needed. And of course, celebrations could begin.
So then you go into Europe the next season. I know you mentioned you played in Europe with Distillery, but I mean, what chance did you give yourselves, especially when you draw Liverpool in the first round?
Well, exactly. When you're champions of England, you feel great. You're going into playing the European Cup now suddenly, and you want to draw against Inter Milan, you want to draw against Juventus, you want to play against Barcelona, or maybe you don't really want to play them so early on in the competition. But whatever you want to do, you want to play in Europe, and then we're drawn against Liverpool, who happen to be European champions as well too. And there wouldn't have been too many give us a chance over the two legs. But at that stage, in the previous season, we had kind of got the Indian sign over Liverpool. You know, they found it hard to beat us. And it was nice to go up to Anfield knowing that Ian Boyer's by your side, you know, where Boyer could look after himself, and he wouldn't take much nonsense from some of the Liverpool players, you know. So that was good. And that would have been great. But as it turns out, at that stage, I really meant just not necessarily in that particular game, which I didn't play in. I'm talking about in general heading up to Anfield, you know, where Boyer could, as I say, look after himself well.
There's these iconic goals as well, Colin Barrett, Gary Birtles as well breaking through. Do you have any Birtles anecdotes as a regular on this podcast that might hang him out to dry that I could throw back at him?
Yeah, fun enough, I just actually mentioned in the book, and I think this was right. Gary had been signed from Long Eaton. He had played a game, I think, wide left-hand side in the previous year, whatever it was. But he seemed to be, you know, dropped down the pecking order when Peter Withe left after we won the league title. Peter played the opening game against Tottenham Hotspur, and then left to go to Newcastle United. And they left a big void in the team, no question about that. Peter Withe was a fantastic footballer for us, really great centre forward, and it was a real shame that he left the football club. I think he was arguing with the manager over about a tenner or 20 quid or something like this year. We thought, oh, crazy, he should have been given it anyway. So he leaves, and then a young lad called Stephen Elliott moves into his position, and Gary really wasn't thought of greatly at that particular time, regardless of how he has turned out. And I remember us playing a game against Mansfield. I think it might have been a county cup game on a Monday or Tuesday night or something like this. And the manager of Mansfield at the time was Billy Bingham, who ended up becoming manager of the Northern Ireland. And asking me, he said, I do like Birtles as a player. He said, do you think he had any interest in coming? And I said, well, I can ask him, absolutely. And Gary would have been very interested in coming. And the next thing you know, whether he goes in to see Brian Clough and Peter Taylor or not, I don't know. But he's thrust into the game the previous before Liverpool. He was, I think it was it against Arsenal? Arsenal.
Yeah.
And does well in the game. And then suddenly there he is in essentially his third game for Nottingham Forest third start in the game. He's playing against Liverpool, and did brilliantly from then on in. So he was naturally a really great fit in many aspects, but more fortunate rather than anything else, because he wasn't the immediate choice after Peter Withe had left.
This is a wider question. Do you need that in a career, in your career as well? Moments of fortune, moments of misfortune we'll come on to as well.
Absolutely. You definitely need them. No question about it. There are moments in games, people talk about sliding doors moments and things like this here, what could have gone. I certainly, in a managerial career, you need a result to go for you just at a certain time, particularly if it's been a struggle before that. Yeah, no question. There's definitely little moments that had they gone the other way, and I also talk about moments of misfortune. Had they been fortunate, then perhaps maybe things would have been different. Isn't that life?
I mean, I guess the big one for you at the time was the 79 European Cup final, when you probably think, this is my moment and it's gone, and obviously you get the year later. But what are your recollections of the 1979 final now? Have they changed at all?
No, the recollections are really, no, they're very, very clear. 3 weeks to the day of the European Cup final, we, Nottingham Forest, were playing Manchester City. And I got kneed in the thigh by Dave Watson, the then centre half of Manchester City. It turned out to be a blood clot in my leg, and I really couldn't straighten the leg for about 8 to 10 days. So as each day was passing and getting closer to the final, I didn't know. Suddenly, I'm this player called Frank Wignall, who used to play for Nottingham Forest, Derby, tells me about a physiotherapist up in Mapperley called Norman Collins. And he said Norman Collins is a brilliant physio. His eyesight's not great, but he's got a fantastic feel and he could help. And so I go outside to do this here. So I'm up to try and get fit for a European Cup final. So I'm there at Norman. The only time Norman could fit me in, because he was so busy right through the day, was at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'm living out in East Bridgeford at the time. So I travel in every single morning to Mapperley to see him, to do at least 2 hours work before I ever go down to the City ground. And I owe Norman Collins a great deal, because I wouldn't even have made it onto the bench had he not been there at the time. So from that viewpoint, great. So I shouldn't, of course, you want to play in a European Cup final. Of course, you don't think that Nottingham Forest are going to get to 2. And Archie Gemmill and myself didn't play and didn't get on the field. And if you're not in that field, man, it doesn't matter about a semi-final. It doesn't matter about great wins against Cologne. You do not feel part of it, And when I look at some of the footage there, when I see the boys jumping around or having won the cup and hoisting it along, and then you see my face in the background as poor looking a face as you're likely to see, then it's not great. So I was obviously disappointed, but I think that the manager, having 3 injuries to concern himself with, myself, Archie Gemmill, and Frank Clark, Frank probably to a lesser extent, he didn't want to be going into a European Cup final with players who hadn't done that much training. And whether I would have played or not, I don't know, since Trevor Francis became eligible to play in the final that year. Who knows? But obviously massively disappointed, as was Archie. And Archie never got a chance after that. Archie went to Birmingham City and so never participated in a European Cup final. But the second time round, totally different. Obviously, you're playing in the final, and this is what it's all about.
There's stories around the medals. I think you have one. Gary Mills has been on here and said one about how he don't think he ever got his medal in 1980 or 79, and it still irks him. And yourself, is it right you didn't get a medal for 79, or you declined it? What's the story?
No, what happened was that once the final whistle goes, and then you're going up to collect your medals. So the players who played and the substitutes get their medals. Unlike now today, in today's game, where medals, there are a number of medals for, let's say, the manager, the coach, some of the backroom staff, things like this here. But in those days, the medals were just cut for players and substitutes. So we got the medals. So when we were in the dressing room after the game was over, after all the celebrations on the field, I think the manager realised that there wasn't a medal for him. and then that he would like to have a medal cut. And they thought the fairest way to do that was not just to take one off a substitute, but to take all the medals of the substitutes and then get the medals cut during the summertime. And then when we come back pre-season, to give the medals back. Now, okay, fine, if that was the case. But what I wanted to do in the meantime was to go outside from the dressing room in the Olympic Stadium in Munich and show it to my family outside, to show the medal. This is the medal that I had won. And I wanted to show the medal, even though I didn't feel part of proceedings, but at least it's there. And I just said I asked the manager, I said, can I do this? And I'll bring the medal back immediately. And he didn't give me the permission to do that. So, and I thought that was kind of lousy, And so I threw the medal across the table and across this massage table in the little dressing room in Munich, and it was like a skimming stone, and I thought that he's going to really go through me here, but he didn't. And then I picked it up on the far side, and then I put it back into the box, the little red box that we were given, and there was a little marker on the box, a little yellow marker. And I drew a little mark on the box, and I said to Jimmy Gordon, who was the coach, Jimmy, this is the medal I want back. I don't want any other medal back other than this one, because this is the one I won tonight. When we were pre-season, we got the medals back. But no, that was real disappointment. We could have gone home with the medal, and then the following day or the day after that, even though the season was over, we could have gone down to the city ground and handed the medals in. And so it just have been nice for family and to have seen the medal, which they didn't do until quite some months later.
Was your relationship with the manager harmed then until you won in 1980, or was it repaired pretty quickly?
I think in January of the following year, the year that we did win it, there was I think Peter Taylor wanted me to leave to go to Coventry City, and I was Mick Ferguson, who was the centre forward for Coventry, was coming in the other direction, and that move never materialised. It went very, very close to doing it. In fact, I actually even signed some blank copies of a contract for Coventry at the time, and the transfer never materialised. So from that viewpoint, I'm probably very grateful and very pleased that it didn't do, because then we go on to the League Cup final, although we lose, but we end up winning the European Cup. And so perhaps if I had gone to Coventry in January of 1980, I wouldn't have been in Madrid that night and when we beat Hamburg.
Forgive me for jumping ahead, Mike, because I'm conscious of the time. Returned to the club as manager in 2019. Obviously, you'd had great success at Celtic, Leicester and Villa. Why come back to Forest at that time? What was the reason?
Just to try and get them promotion. That was really as simple as that. I had the opportunity a number of times beforehand, including the previous year. But I thought this would be the time. It was a long time since the club had been in the big league, and that's all I wanted to do, was try and get them promotion. I said to the owner at the time that just wanted the 18 months to do so. If we couldn't get them up in that time, particularly in this second year, then I would obviously walk away, and that was just that opportunity. So he was happy with that. I came in January, about halfway through January at the time. We took a couple of loan players, and I think I signed a lad who was out of contract, or was going to be out of contract, at Leicester City, big centre half at the time. But I'm not so sure that 19 games in charge is any real criterion, So if I'd known that that's what I was going to get, then obviously I wouldn't have bothered, particularly for a club so close to your heart.
I mean, it's easy. It's a hindsight question, but do you wish you hadn't taken it now?
Oh, again, just getting back, Matt, if 19 games, I never for 1 minute, I thought, in actual fact, the owner said to me, don't even worry about this season. If we can scramble into the playoffs, that would be great. It'd be lovely if that was the case. But he said, no, we will have reinforcements in the summertime, and we'll really go for it. And I thought that's great. It does take you a couple of weeks, if not a little bit longer, to get to know the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and It is amazing to see how few players are there at the football club now. Oh, you would expect the changes to take place when the team goes into the Premier League, but even the changes that the other managers were able to enact, then fine. So absolutely, yes. If I'd hindsight been a wonderful thing, but after 19 games, particularly having won the last 3 of the season, although it's, I mean, too late to get into the playoffs. However, but you're just getting to know the team, and no. So that's it. I do 1 week of pre-season, and called into by the chief executive to say that the way I was wanting to run the football club was not the way they were wanting to run it. So I'm sitting in my office then 24 minutes later when Lamucci is announced as the manager. You'd think that at least they let me to get out of the office, but I'm still in my office at the City Ground when this is unfolding. But that's the nature of the game. That's it. But as I said, just getting to know the strengths of the team. And then I noticed that there was this idea that there was sort of a player power against me. Well, I'm not so sure, Matthew, that there was that many players of great power in the dressing room. You know, in all honesty, I think Ben Watson had won a medal, but I'm not so sure that it was littered with gold dust after that. So I'm not so sure that was actually true.
Yeah, I mean, I remember at the time it felt like there was some fairly substantial briefing against you, that the players didn't like you and didn't like your methods. Is that not a fair reflection then in your mind?
Well, one never knows about what is. I mean, what does that matter? When I went to manage, I went to manage Wycombe Wanderers when I started out, and there are a number of players railed against my management, and then came right through, and were stalwarts in the team. I know I mentioned this word before. When I go to Leicester City, I can't win a game to save my life early on. And players then, arguments in dressing rooms and things like this here, all those players we carry, you know, when we have success, all those players are there lifting their medals at Hillsborough in the League Cup final replay, and 2 years later at Wembley. So all of those things can happen. I've fallen out with some players at Celtic as well, too, some very, very good players at Celtic who pushed it to the side. And my first time dealing with Stilian Petrov, for instance, a young player at Celtic, and saying to him, Stilian, you've got to really get a push on here now. You've got to do some things, otherwise you're going to be left behind. What did Petrov do? He said he did, absolutely did that there. And then when I went to Aston Villa, he was my first signing. So Petrov was a terrific footballer, great player, but needed pushing like anything else. So I don't get this. If that style of management they talk about is not to someone's liking, well, it didn't seem to be the next manager's liking or the manager after that. There, you know. So whatever it may be, so far. But what I'm not so sure that is really true. And if it is true, although it was perpetuated, you know. So I get back to saying that. There wouldn't be too many players in that dressing room at that time that would have had amazing power, as in, you know, that the whole world was going to be listening to.
I wanted to ask you about 2 players, one who's there now and get to him. The other one is João Carvalho, who my time writing about Forest has probably divided the fan base more than other. There's the camp who think he's brilliant. There's the camp who think he's pretty much anything but brilliant. There was a real clamour for you to pick him. He had one good game in 5 or 6, and that put a lot of pressure on you. What was your experience of managing João?
Right. Okay. Well, he was the most expensive player at that time before this season, or perhaps even last season. He was the most expensive player accordingly, anyway, that he had cost what was about £15 million from Benfica, where he'd actually played 2 games for Benfica, and suddenly he's £15 million player. Well, he actually wasn't in the team when I arrived, believe it or not. I had watched them play the previous week, them being Forest, at Reading, where they had lost against Reading, and so he wasn't in the side. So I was essentially going to go roughly as my first game in charge with roughly the team that had played before. I didn't really know, and we didn't win against Bristol City, but we won our second game. And so we were up and running, but there was this, clamour to play him, seemingly from a section of the fans. Carvalho. It seemed a nice nice sounding name that, that could ring nicely with them. But the proof of the pudding, like anything else, is on the field of play. And I'd have to ask how many times Lamucci, who said I think Lamucci in his first 2 weeks as manager said that Carvalho was a great, great player. And what did he do? Never played him. But then the clamour went down then after that there when Lamucci was getting some results. I know that it went a bit pear-shaped for the playoffs, but when you're getting some results, then the clamour dies down. And then the next manager was it Chris Hughton? He didn't play him either, and I don't know where. I'm not so sure where Carvalho is now at the moment. So there was this big clamour to play. He had nice ability, but you need more than just nice ability to perform at any level. Never mind the championship. And so I don't know. I'm not so sure that there's a clamour for him now at the minute. Is there?
I don't know where he is. Portuguese second division, I think.
He did play. He did play a very, very fine game against Middlesbrough one day. Tony Pulis was in charge of Middlesbrough, but I think Middlesbrough at that stage had decided that promotion wasn't for them. And on a very nice day he played really well to show a glimpse of what might be there. And then the following Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm not exactly sure. He played alongside an Iranian forward. The two of them played against Aston Villa and never got a kick. So then Aston Villa would have been the benchmark rather than a fading Middlesbrough. You mentioned another player. Was it Joe Worrell? No, Joe Worrell was. I think he was at Rangers at the time. So I met Joe as he was just finishing his stint at Rangers. So he would have been back in the ground. And then there was young Ryan Yates that I prevented from going. He was out on loan. I think he had been at loan at Notts County. I think somebody else was asking for him. And I just said to him when I met him in January, can you stay put here, please, young man? Let's see what you can do here. Hopefully you'll get an opportunity. His attitude was fantastic, and I'm basing this on his real attitude to training. And he was ready for it every single day, and he was only a young lad. And so thankfully he stayed put, and it is really nice to see him having done so well, particularly last season, and scoring the goals that he's capable of doing, and being a strong midfield player. So it would be nice for him to continue that career at this level. This level is obviously a massive step up again, but it's really nice to see that. So getting back to the point, I think there have been one or two players, I'm sure, who would be not displeased that I left the football club. And I'd like to think that there was quite a number of players who would have thought that I could have improved their careers, as I don't want to sound as really boastful, as I actually think I have done during most of my managerial career.
Just on Yates, the question I was going to ask was, did you see at the time the player who's now been Forest's probably best player this season? Did you see that as a possibility? It's
hard to say all of those things, man. It's hard, what I did see is I saw a blinding commitment to want to train every single day, to be out there, to be ready to go, to do all of the things that you would want if that player was your son. Those are exactly the things that you'd be asking him to do. Get your head down, go and train as hard as you can for every single minute. The training sessions themselves might not necessarily be long, but you're going to put everything into it. And so during the course of that time, I really got to know him, and it was really nice. It was nice to see him do so well, even when you've left the football club. So really, really pleasing. Do you see him doing a lot of these particular things? That I think is really hard to say, but most importantly, he broke into the team very, very quickly in my 19 games in charge, and did exceptionally well.
Did you see the makings of a squad that yourself and Roy Keane could mould that summer with some signings then, or did it need a total overhaul if you'd been given the opportunity?
No, it definitely needed a big overhaul. Definitely needed an overhaul. There were players at the football club who just simply were not good enough to play for Nottingham Forest for a start, and I didn't think were good enough to take the team into the big league. Yeah, so no, I definitely needed an overhaul. but I had my mind set and some players, hopefully, and. But it would be, it'd be nice to have been given that opportunity, particularly at Nottingham Forest. But listen, you know what? Life goes on. That's it. It's over.
The last question I wanted to ask about Forest, time as manager was, like I said before, you'd managed massive clubs in Celtic and Villa. Was Forest a different club to manage because the owner had been in Greece? He has this reputation of very high turnover of players, a high turnover of managers as well. Was it a different experience for anything else you'd had in your career?
No, I didn't. No, I think the for your time in management, I think you actually expect you're in the results business. This is important at the end of the day. In the 19 games, we had probably like a 41 or 42% win rate or something like this here. But it's getting to know it's really trying to get to know the players at that time. And you're pushed in. If it had been given, if I'd come into the football club maybe and been able to work with players in a pre-season, for instance, and that was after the first week, at least the new manager was able to do that. Lamucci was able to work with the players during the pre-season. I think it gives you an indication of what you're facing. When I went to Aston Villa, I had 2 weeks in which to work with the players before they opened the season. 2 weeks, not a great deal of time, I must admit, but at least it was 2 weeks, if nothing else. Here, your manager on a Thursday afternoon or something like this here, and then push in the game on the Saturday. So it does take you a few games. And of course, you were talking there about a clamouring to play some players, particularly Carvalho in the side. And as I say, those supporters who were clamouring for them, I don't think are clamouring now. So all of this here is all part of managing the team, but essentially trying to win football matches. And when we looked as if we were getting some things right and winning the last 3 games of the season, albeit, and I agree, too late to get into the playoffs, then you think you've got something in which to work with. And of course, pre-season, which I was really looking forward to, and I did the week there. And funnily enough, we did a week at Woollerton Park, and which was a tough week for the players, a really tough week. And I think some of them were even railing against that. But apparently, I hear some of them saying afterwards, the week's training at Woollerton Park stood them in brilliant stead during the course of the season. Yeah, well, there you go. Players for you,
You mentioned players for you then. I mean, as it stands, that's your most recent management job. Would you fancy one more crack at another job or not?
I think, on all honesty, that 19 games at a club that I had spent 10 years as a player, I think that doesn't sit really that comfortably with you like anything else. But I suppose perhaps maybe in the last year or two, I've hidden behind COVID as much as anything else. And maybe now it might be a chance to get out and do something. As my daughters, one of my daughters told me there only a couple of weeks ago, Dad, everybody thinks you've died, so perhaps I'm still alive anyway.
Last question I wanted to ask you before we go then. Forest, as it stands, going into the World Cup, 18th in the Premier League, on the back of some decent form. What chance do you give them of staying up?
Good set of results just recently, yes. And for the young manager who stepped in there, just let me tell you, this year's doing really, really super. Absolutely super. Really great job in getting the team up last year, considering the position that he inherited. Really good. Well done him. And then suddenly getting a lot of players thrown at him, and having to manage those, managing expectations, managing players who are not on the side, things like this here, just gelling, getting a little bit of time to do that. And while you're, while it looked as if you're under severe pressure, I felt that he shouldn't have been even early on in proceedings. But it was nice. It was nice to see at least seemingly a token effort by the manager, or sorry, by the owner of the football club, to give him the contract and get things sorted out. And well done him. Really good, excellent season last year. And there's no reason with the players that they have. And this is the point. You still have to manage them, I accept that, but you have got a lot of players there at the football club. And I think the squad in itself is definitely strong enough, with having spent a fair amount of money to do so. But I think the squad is strong enough to stay up in the league without a doubt.
Excellent. Martin, I've kept you for a long time. Viewers and listeners won't know, but we had terrible technical problems getting this all sorted. So you've been incredibly patient with us for almost 2 hours now. But just a final thing to say, Martin's book is out now, and you can catch him on Saturday 2 till 3 p.m. at Waterstones in Bridlesmith Gate for the book signing. Hopefully you're looking forward to that, Martin, to catch up with the fans again.
It would be an opportunity, and maybe, you never know, Carvalho might be there, you know.
He might still have that shop that his girlfriend opened with him, in the city. You never know. Right. We shall let Martin go, and we'll be back on Monday with Matt Ford, and then we've got some other interviews lined up to keep us going through the World Cup. But in the meantime, thanks very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that, and we shall catch you soon.
Thank you for listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for listening.